Welcome. Thank you for being here. Good evening. I'm Larry Rippey. I'm the Arts and Events Coordinator for the San Geronimo Valley Community Center, and that's in Marin County, California, for all of you out-of-towners.
Hello, I'm Deborah Emerson, founder and co-host of the Artist Film Series with Larry. Welcome to a very special Valley Arts and Lecture Series, Radio Rebels, when Eclectic Music Mattered, about the pioneering men and women who created a new style of music radio.
Back in the 1960s, there was only AM radio, and music stations played the same 40 songs over and over. Of course, that's why they called it Top 40. There were a few FM stations, but they carried educational, foreign language, and classical music programs. They all delivered in a very formal, rigid style.
FM was an ignored technology, but it had better audio fidelity. Then, in the early 1970s, a bunch of long-haired counterculture amateurs stepped in and made FM radio sound really, really good.
They called it freeform or progressive radio. It featured young people talking directly to other young people playing a music that grown-ups didn't understand. Before long, FM was so successful that by 1978, car manufacturers were forced to make FM radios a standard feature in all new cars.
To tell us about that time and to look ahead to the future, we welcome three card-carrying radio rebels.
The only San Geronimo Valley resident is Ben Manilla. Ben began his radio career in 1975 in his native New York City. He became a DJ and production director at WLIR FM and then went on to be a producer at various radio networks. In 1991, he moved to the Bay Area to start BMP Audio. Since then, BMP has produced hundreds of podcasts and radio programs in most every format. From everyone from Disney to the Jimi Hendrix family. The House of Blues radio show with Dan Aykroyd aired nationally and internationally for 25 years. For over a decade, he taught at UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism, and Ben's work with the Library of Congress earned him a Peabody Award.
And also joining our panel is Bonnie Simmons. Everybody in the San Francisco Bay Area world knows Bonnie. She moved here in 1968 after growing up in New York and Colorado. At KSAN, she started as the record librarian and went on to become program director, operations director, and a full-time announcer. She later worked at a number of different radio stations, record companies, and became the audio director at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Since 2009, Bonnie has served as the executive director of the Bill Graham Memorial Foundation and also the artist logistics director for Hardly Strictly Bluegrass for 21 years. And she's still connected to her radio roots. For over 3 decades, Bonnie Simmons has been a mainstay DJ on KPFA, Berkeley, California.
Okay, our final radio rebel is Ben Fong-Torres. Ben grew up in Oakland's Chinatown. He's a writer and broadcaster best known for his work at Rolling Stone magazine and as a real-life character in the film Almost Famous. While at Rolling Stone, he was a Sunday DJ on KSAN. He's published 10 books covering topics such as Top 40 Radio, The Doors, Motown, The Grateful Dead, Graham Parsons, The Eagles, and Little Feat. For many years, Ben wrote the Radio Waves column in the San Francisco Chronicle, and he currently programs and hosts a show online at Moon Alice Radio, and has won 3 Northern California Emmys for his work on television. He's also the subject of a brand new documentary, Like a Rolling Stone, The Life of Ben Fong-Torres. And thank you all for being here. And I think I'm going to start with Ben Fong-Torres, that is, and in your case, you come to this, hi Ben, you come to this both as a journalist and as a DJ. And so I was really curious about your take on this, and especially, I guess, the early days, what I consider sort of the proto KSAN days, since KMPX was a big part of that. And I think you have some inside information in that respect.
You're muted, Ben.
Okay. All right. yeah, hi, welcome. And you have to draw a bridge between KSAN and what came before, which was KMPX. And I began as a fan. I listened to Larry Miller on the All Night Show. And so by the time Tom Donahue, who, by the way, exemplifies the fact that, in fact, not all of the FM pioneers were amateurs. Tom Donahue was a true pro, one of the great voices, giants of local broadcasting. And he started the full format at KMPX around March of '67, just before the Summer of Love. By March of '68, they were on strike.
Mm.
So then that led to KSAN. Some of the staff moved over there to Metro Media. They adapted the format, took in the freeformers, and KSAN sailed on to great heights. And I was fortunate enough when I was freelancing at Rolling Stone, for which I began writing some stuff early in '68, to fall into the time frame of the KMPX strike. So I preferred my services helping to cover the strike, one of the wackiest strikes ever, with rock bands like the Grateful Dead and Creedence Clearwater, Country Joe, rallying, supporting the KMPX staff out in the streets. Anyway, I wound up covering the strike for several issues for Rolling Stone, then joined the magazine as an editor and writer. Then about a year later, around spring of '69, was hired to be an editor and writer at Rolling Stone. And shortly after that, got a phone call from Paul Boucher, the program director at KSAN, saying that Tom Donahue was making a movie, Medicine Ball Caravan, taking a bunch of musicians across the country on a bus, of course, a magic bus, and playing free concerts. And he said, you know, he's taking several of our weekend jocks with him. And have you done radio? And I had done something. So I volunteered to fill in for that month, which turned into 10 years because some of the DJs lost their way home. And that kind of exemplifies free form in radio and in life. And I wound up then straddling KSAN on weekends and fill in, and also doing more than full time at Rolling Stone. So that was my entree into both radio and records.
Mark, well, I didn't realize that the two were so much in tandem. I thought with KSAN it came a little bit later than that. That's pretty impressive. Just quickly, I want to move over to Bonnie and ask you pretty much the same question, how you got started. I know it's KSAN is kind of the origins for you in this respect anyway.
In this respect, when I first came to San Francisco in 1968, I ended up getting a couple of jobs. One was that I worked on weekends and at nights at the Avalon Ballroom for Chet Helms. But I needed a job to also kind of sustain me a little bit better than that, because as I was thinking when we were talking the other day on the phone, I think my rent was $160 a month, and that was split between four of us. It was a 4-bedroom boxcar flat in San Francisco. And so we each had to come up with at least $40 a month. But I had worked at a place called Advance Music on 5th Street in San Francisco. It was a black, what was known as a one-stop, the place that people got records so that they could take them to their stores and sell them. And we dealt with all of the black mom and pop record stores all over the Bay Area. And it was quite a good education. I then went on to do kind of a boring but useful job to me, because it taught me a lot, which was I was the inventory person for the big record wholesaler who sold all the records to all the white front stores in the Bay Area. And my job was to drive to a different white front store every day and inventory all the racks of records. And through that, I got this weird working knowledge of records and how you get them and what companies put them out. And in just socially hanging out with a bunch of the people at KSAN, weirdly, just fell into that bunch of folks. I eventually I applied to be the record librarian when Tony Pigg was the music director there. Every 6 months or so, a different full-time jock would become the music director for 6 months until everybody else got annoyed with them for one reason or another, and then somebody else would take the job. Tony was interviewing for a new record librarian, but I didn't get the job because he decided that it made the best sense to hire a Virgo as record librarian. So 6 months later, Dusty Street became the music director. And I knew Dusty because I used to find her really rare R&B records because she really loved R&B. That's how I got my job at KSAN as the record librarian and the public service director. And pretty shortly after that, became the pigeon who took all the shifts that nobody else wanted to take. That would be like the 6 a.m. on Sunday shift. Or-
But that was the best time to be on the radio.
well, I wasn't actually on the radio. I was working as the engineer. That was our talk show slot. But one of the things that I got to do before the live talk show folks showed up was I got to be the engineer who sat there and ran the Alan Watts tapes
Oh, my goodness, yeah.
every week.
This is
So-
one of those.
But that was how I started out at KSAN, and then I think I was there for 9 years, and it grew into pretty much every job there was there besides sales.
Mhm. And just quickly, I mean, as a DJ, when I think back, I think the first time I heard women as DJs was probably KSAN. Maybe that's my imagination, but I don't see that as being, part of corporate radio, commercial radio. And you and Dusty Street and just a few were really a big part of that. Would you say that's true? Is that really?
Yeah, I mean, we can find instances of other women that were on the air, but I certainly, before I even got to work at KSAN, I considered Dusty my mentor and kind of role model, because she was, a woman that not only was on the air, but was choosing all of her own music and was encyclopedic in the areas of music that she preferred, and was an all-around good sort, as she still is.
And choosing your own music, that's essentially what this is all about. I mean, that's one of the fundamental differences between this kind of radio and what was usually going on with commercial radio, what I'm calling commercial radio anyway, top 40 radio. And I guess, Ben, we need to cross the continent here and kind of check in with you as well, because I mean, you were doing the same thing with WLIR not that much longer.
Well, I got in a little later. I realized I was 22 years old and I'd just gotten out of college, and I got my first job creating news features called news blimps. I think I have a button here of the pilot of I'm a news blimp pilot. But news blimps were shows that they were like little podcasts. They were 3 minutes, 4 minutes long, something like that. And they were made for freeform progressive radio stations. And this was 1975. And I remember getting my first check. I remember holding the check, and it was a check for $15. And I thought, I am a professional. Somebody is giving me money to do this. And I just recently, in COVID, I went down in the basement and I found all these old news blimp tapes. And then coincidentally, I got a reel-to-reel tape recorder. And so I digitized a bunch of these old news blimps from the 1970s. And it's amazing to me that, we're still dealing with the stuff we were talking about then. Because what we were doing with the news was we were taking it and approaching it the way sort of Seth Meyers does, or Colbert does now, where things were fast-paced, where we're directing the information directly to our audience. We had a lot of music, we had comedy, interviews, Monty Python, rude noises, sound effects, but it was just fast-moving news information. Here in San Francisco, you guys, KSAN had Scoop Nisker.
Yeah.
There was Danny Schechter, the news dissector at WBCN. We were all in the business of doing that. And the news blimps aired on WLIR. And after a while, they hired me as a part-timer. And it was an amazing time. I just got in the very tail end of that progressive freeform era. But the format was move around the library, play stuff that you don't know that well, learn about new kinds of music. You could bring in music from home if you wanted. I don't think people realize that today, disc jockeys have no say. I mean, on traditional commercial radio stations, they have no say. The only places where they do have say are on small community stations or nonprofit public radio stations like KWMR here in West Marin, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
You were talking about moving around the library, Ben. I agree with you. And I'd like to go back to the basics of freeform radio in its earliest and best days. There were several things going on. And when I was a fan of KMPX and KSAN, I loved the fact that the disc jockeys came up with sets of music. And it was music that might be thematic. It would carry a message altogether, whether political or social or cultural or just fun. And the music was all over the map. We were not told anything, just come in and play your records. And so you could go from Cheech and Chong to Motown to a Miles Davis if you wanted to, if you dared. And
the main thing was to make it sound good, to make the transition sound good and to have some sort of overall arching statement that you're making.
That's right. You can just do it a random records on the turntables. Remember turntables? And so that was some of the uniqueness of the format, as well as being, as Diane, my wife, has put it, a bulletin board to the community. That before any of the social media and even Craigslist or whatever, we were not only want ads, but also news bulletins for our community.
I'd love to jump off of that and talk a little bit about some of the things that KSAN did as a community radio station, because they are not things that necessarily you would be able to do these days. We had something called listeners' personals, and listeners could either call in and leave their information, or they could write us or drop by the station and fill one out. And it could be something like, I need to go to LA next Thursday, and I'd be willing to help pay for gas if there's somebody out there that's driving to LA. I'd like to drive along. Or it might be my dog got lost, or it might be I'm selling, a sled, or it could be almost anything. And we had 3 different times on the air that we would pull out a handful from the box of listeners' personals, and we would read them on the air with people's phone numbers, sometimes with their addresses. And it never devolved into anything that you could imagine if you did that now, that there would be 100 bad dead ends to that. We also had something called the turkey exchange at Thanksgiving, and people would write in and say, I'm new in town and I don't have any family here, and I'd love to come to somebody's Thanksgiving dinner, and I'm a vegetarian. And then they would give their phone number, or people would call and say, we live in Mill Valley and we have 3 extra places at our Thanksgiving table, and we're making a traditional Thanksgiving dinner with turkey and all the trimmings. And here's our phone number for anybody that would like to come. And we did this and hooked up thousands of people over the years. And as far as I know, other than maybe people having an opportunity to perhaps partake of something that would make them silly during the dinner and get them high, I don't believe that I ever heard of there being a bad instance that happened with that going on. Just other community things, when the oil spill happened in Stinson, KSAN set up a phone bank. And in those days, remember, we're not talking cell phones here. We're talking about, we took every phone that we had in the station and lined them up in the hallway with tables, and set it up so that KSAN could become this community source to hook everybody together so that hundreds of people who wanted to go out and help save the birds had a way to connect with other people that were out there. And we sort of ended up kind of shepherding that to get thousands of people washing birds with, I remember, we discovered that Dawn detergent, dishwashing detergent, was the best one to get oil off of sick, sad birds.
At WLIR, we had the airline where we had volunteers. We'd always have 2 or 3 people there 24 hours a day answering the telephone. And people would call up with all sorts of crazy questions. And, you know, they had all sorts of the airliners had all sorts of information banks at them. They had all the Rolodexes with numbers and all sorts of things and emergency numbers and that kind of thing. It was really a tribe. I mean, we were one tribe at WLIR, and I assume it was the same out here at KSAN.
It was. Speaking of listeners' personals, I should mention that when Bonnie mentioned the idea of I lost my dog, that's exactly how I came to get married. That is that call saying she had lost her dog named Puppy. That's how lazy she is, naming her pets. And so she found Puppy on her own, but it was that phone call where she said, hey, we went to SF State together, remember me? And did I? And so then we started seeing each other, and we've been married 46 years now. Thanks to KSAN and listeners for.
Hey, Diane.
All right.
Just quickly, I want to say, and speaking of community, if you have any questions or anything, please put them in the chat so we can bring a couple of those up later. Incredible. This sort of Instagram before Instagram is what we're talking about. One thing that I've always sensed, and I got a lot of this from watching the documentary about WLIR, and I know this from other experiences, is there's this intense allegiance to these radio stations, these particular radio stations, that goes beyond, I would say, the simple notion of someone needs to turn on the radio and hear some tunes. There's something else that goes on there in terms of the loyalty and downright affection for the stations. And do you have any way of take on that, any way of describing what that's about?
At the time, I think one of the things that was sort of a secret, something that we came across at KSAN, not consciously, you know, we didn't plan things ahead so that we could promote things weeks in advance. And artists would often come to the city, and it was as simple as, oh, Ray Davies is coming in tomorrow afternoon from the Kinks, and then he would just be there on the air. Maybe there would be a couple of mentions beforehand, but lots of times bands would just stop by and we wouldn't even have any advance warning. So there was a sense that if you didn't listen all the time, or at least check in on the radio station, you might miss something.
Yeah.
And I think that, and also, you know, people in those days, when we dealt with ratings, it was in hours that people listened. You know, you would be trying to get the highest quarter hours, and that would be people listening for 7 hours, 8 hours a day. Now it's radio stations vying to get people to stay in one place for 10 minutes. It's just a different paradigm.
Well, I used to love when I was on the air and somebody would call up and say, hey man, would you play the Grateful Dead? Well, we're playing the Grateful Dead right now. Oh yeah, I'm not listening, but if I was listening, I'd want to hear the Grateful Dead.
Oh dear, yeah.
One of the great things for me about the career that I've had, and probably I know it's the case for Ben and Bonnie, is getting to meet so many wonderful people, my heroes, and interviewing, I mean, Mick Jagger, Chuck Berry, Ray Charles, Etta James, well, you know, the list goes on and on and on. But the thing about WLIR was you actually got to know people a little better because we were playing such different music, and we're often with the only radio station in town that would be playing that music. The artists would gravitate to us. And I know for me, I got to know Frank Zappa really well. We did a bunch of stuff together. Got to know Joey Ramone. Turned out he lived 2 blocks from me. So Joey and I would do all kinds of things together. And, you know, it's wonderful when you get a chance to really know these people and meet them and
Um,
hang out with them.
yeah. Go ahead. I was lucky that I had the double job situation, so that when I was interviewing someone for Rolling Stone and they were in town for a show, then why not come by KSAN and be a guest disc jockey? And so that was the case with Stevie Wonder. David Crosby hung out for probably an entire show and into the next shift. And Steve Martin, early in his career, when he was an opening act at the boarding house on 960 Bush, would come by and do gag.
Him a lot.
He did a lot of sight gags on my show. And,
You know,
Steve,
it's
Uh,
funny with all the enormously popular musicians who came and hung out at the station. And as Ben is saying, I mean, sometimes we had the opportunity for, in one way or another, to get to know them and sort of start a longer term relationship so that when they came to town, they always came in.
Mhm.
But the ones that I just was thinking, just off the top of my head, the weirdest like bunch of people that I thought how great that could happen. I remember I got to interview Mel Brooks when he was in town promoting one of his movies, Arnold Schwarzenegger, way back when when he made the bodybuilding movie, you know, that at the very beginning of his career. Henny Youngman was there with Terry McGovern one morning. You know.
Well, the craziest thing that I did was when I was in New York, I worked with two icons of the 60s. I worked with Walter Cronkite, and then I would leave him and go to 30 Rock to tape Soupy Sales.
Wow.
That was like, so, I mean, it was schizophrenic,
yeah,
you know.
impressive juxtaposition. You know, slightly different is, aside from, you know, I guess reinforcing these careers, I often think in the cases of both stations, how much they had to do with actually maybe shaping or launching careers. I mean, what I'm immediately thinking of is what happened with a song called "Oh Happy Day," which was practically
Bob McClay.
Yeah, and well, I think of Baco also as somebody who played it. I used to hear him playing it endlessly, you know, literally one time after another in a serial fashion.
Yeah, Baco's who I cut my teeth on just learning about music. Baco was a friend of mine, and I learned so much from him. He a fellow named Abe Kesh. His name was Baco, and he was a record producer who worked for Mercury Records. He just had an extraordinary sort of ear and ability. But there were all of those things, you know, Bob McClay with the 2001 soundtrack, and all these sort of oddball things. Pachelbel's Canon. That was also Bob McClay with the panpipe people playing Pachelbel's Canon.
We also dug the Bulgarian.
Oh yeah, the Bulgarian singers. That's right.
Yes, they became a top bar station. Yes. And Bonnie, speaking about guests popping into the station, there was the one who popped in and almost never left for an entire weekend. And that would be, of course, the one and only Bill Graham. We devoted a weekend.
We did a 60-hour special with Bill Graham, where I remember helping Mylan Melvin, a fellow that worked with us named Mylan Melvin, a wonderful, wonderful guy, produced it. And I went to Bill's house and got all the tapes. You know, they weren't really supposed to ever have taped all those Fillmore shows, but of course they did. And Bill had all of the Fillmore shows in cardboard boxes in his basement in Mill Valley, where they had gotten flooded and were incredibly moldy and dirty. And he just said, just take them. And we took them, and we had guys working on them for months, trying to clean them up, and managed to sort of organize them. And we had Bill come to the station, and we basically made him stay awake for 60 hours because each hour was devoted to a different Fillmore show. And Mylan had gone out and interviewed all sorts of people that had various takes on what had happened at these shows. And lots of musicians came by either live or we had them on tape. and each hour devoted to one show, and it would sort of cue Bill to talk about the various artists that played at that particular show. And a couple of people came, he got in big fights with them on the air. One of them was Nick Gravenitis, who is from your neck of the woods there. But we let Bill sleep about every 6 or 7 hours when there were really long tracks on the air, like when we were playing some Dead. And there'd be like a 30-minute break where he didn't have to do anything. And we had these giant pillows in my office and in the record library called Pasha pillows. That was one of our sponsors. You know, they were just enormous, like 6 foot in, you know, radius circles. And Bill would take a little nap on the Pasha pillow for 20 minutes. And then we'd wake him up and get him back in the booth. And he got pretty dingy by the end of the weekend.
Well, I imagine. I just want to go back to the East Coast for a moment, because I guess we were talking briefly there about helping move some sort of music forward or launching careers. And it seems like WLIR really had a big role in that, especially with Europe, and the stories I've heard of all how this music would get to this station and how you would wind up with a lot of these musicians as soon as they got to the United States would make their way to Long Island to seek out this station.
Well, it was, you know, we made the transition. WLIR at first was this freeform progressive radio station. We, you know, the format was move around the library, play anything you want. And then all of a sudden these rock formats became every day. And there were rock stations all over New York that were playing sort of the same stuff. It's called album-oriented rock, right? So they were playing similar stuff to what we were playing, and we were just a pea shooter on Long Island. We were not a flamethrower in New York. So we had to do something. And in the late 70s, we all got together in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, and said, look, we can't out Styx and REO Speedwagon, these radio stations. They've got a lock on that. Let's go to the music that we're listening to, which was the music of the streets of New York, Talking Heads and Blondie and the Ramones and that sort of stuff, television, and the new music from England. And because we were on Long Island, we were near JFK Airport. And because we were on Long Island, so many of the stewardesses listened to us. And so we would say, here's $100. When you go to London, go to this big record store and just buy some records for us and bring them back. And of course, back then you couldn't just take a keyboard and bring up music anytime you wanted. You had to have the physical copy of it in order to play it. Yeah. And we got in all kinds of trouble by playing U2 and Duran Duran and the Police way before it was hitting the United States. Because of that, we became very friendly with these radios, these British artists who would come over and hang out.
Pretty amazing. The clock is ticking. I keep thinking, well, I have a couple of questions, maybe they're related, but one is, do you see, what is this particular kind of radio, which was kind of a moment in time, so it seems, is there a legacy here? Is there a lasting value to that? Do you see it kind of percolating through in any way to what's going on now?
I think it continues to inspire today's generation of music lovers. There's a thin line between loving music and wanting to share it, whether with friends on Instagram or TikTok or on the radio. And radio is redefined now. It has been for the last 15 or so years with the changes in technology. But the love of music remains, and you can find your music. You just have to search harder. You have to go to public radio. You have to, in some cases, go to college radio. You have to go on to a satellite or at least online. You have to find specialty shows. There are certain stations, commercial stations, that still play a nice eclectic format of music. And I'm thinking of a station like The Crush up in the wine country. And K-Pig continues on. And I've been asked to do a shout out for Philadelphia stations, XPN and MMR. They're much more commercial now. They're playing classic rock, but still they have that legacy as so many East Coast stations did, dating back to WFMU and WBAI in New York. That is too part of the history. WOR FM was right there with KMPX and KSAN. So there's a rich history and people are still carrying on.
I agree with Ben. It also carries with any of us, no matter when we started or what we might still be doing. I know I have sort of an unusual situation because I have stayed on the air and do, just a couple of hours every week on KPFA, but I'm essentially doing it in the same way, although it's not ultimately a nostalgia show by any means, because I'm just not that nostalgic person in a sense. I'm still listening to music and finding things that I still like. It's remarkable also, just, I know it's really extraordinary to have it, but I have the honor of having a multi-generational audience. Sometimes people will call, it'll be young people, and they're calling to say, my parents, sometimes they say grandparents, used to listen to you. And I remember when I was a really young child that you would be on in the background. And now I'm still listening at this point. It doesn't go away. The methodology and the way that we get music maybe changes to some extent, but there's still, people are just as mad for music as we were in 1968. There's no divide there as I see it.
And the other aspect of it is beyond the music, is the community, is the communal aspect, the sense of a tribe, that you're speaking to a specific group of people. I mean, to me today, a successful radio station is not one that has a bazillion listeners, but one that has a tight audience that pays attention, that is part of a community, part of a group. And the radio station is basically reflecting the attitudes of that group. And the power of radio is the power of being able to be local and deliver information around you. As we've said, if there were an earthquake tomorrow, 3/4 of the radio stations in San Francisco would still be carrying on as if nothing happened. Whereas the community stations, the stations that are really serving the audience, would jump in and take over. And like when KWMR did here in the North Bay when the fires hit.
Sure.
KWR went 24 hours a day informing people where the fires were, what was happening, where they could go to get information and supplies and such.
And the same with KSRO in Santa Rosa.
Yeah. They were instrumental during the fires.
Aside from being local and live, radio is free. I was at Youth Radio a number of years ago talking about the so-called death of radio as all the kids flee to their Apple devices and everything else. And there was a kid there, and I said, "Have you left radio?" And he said, "No." Why? Well, I don't have to buy an iPod or program or get a computer and put a playlist together. Radio is free. And so as long as it is, there will be listeners.
Oh, that is encouraging, because that is always in my mind is what is the future of radio? Because I do see this sort of, it's almost like a delicatessen kind of approach of just snatching songs, but it's in an absence of the actual human beings that are these personalities that we've been talking about, all the Big Daddy Tom Donahues and all the people that have come with it and the community that's come with it. That part is something I'd love to see stick around. Actually, well, we have a little time here, and I'm looking at the chat, just trying to see if there's some questions that might be, this one is the first one I'm coming to here, in fact, is pretty much what we've been talking about, is what is the effect of Sirius, or Sirius, I guess it's pronounced. And maybe you already addressed that, maybe that, but it does seem like that is something to contend with.
Well, to me, we're all messed up because of capitalism. I mean, they deregulated radio in the late, in the late 1990s. And it used to be that you could only own 8 radio station, television stations, or newspapers.
Yeah.
And then they deregulated it, and anybody could buy as many as they wanted. Originally, there were Sirius and XM on purpose. There were 2 satellite networks. But you know what? It was too expensive. So now there's just one. Just the same way there's, maybe 3 or 4 companies that run the majority of radio stations in America. And it's just a shame that deregulation did that to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm just curious, are there more questions out there from folks? I'm scrolling through the chat just now, and I'm seeing mostly everybody saying how wonderful it is to see people here. and a lot of strolls down memory lane, I can tell you that. There's all these people saying, oh, I listened to you here and I listened to you there. And I am kind of interested in opening it up a little bit to that community we've been talking about. If there's anyone out there with a question for our guests here, maybe just raise your hand. And
well, one story that occurs to me that I was thinking about is one of the most embarrassing times I had, not on the radio, but was the owner of the radio station of WLIR lived in a mansion in the North Shore of Long Island, had a big yacht and everything. And we had like a party for the radio station of, I don't know, it was 4th of July or something. And there was a party at his house, and all the bathrooms downstairs were taken, and I really had to go to the bathroom. So I went upstairs and I opened the first door I found, and there was the general manager and the owner and 2 gentlemen I didn't recognize around a double bed, and on the bed were 2 suitcases loaded with cash.
oh, that's really
with money. And I thought, I don't know why I'm here, but I'm not going to be here for very long. Bye, thank you, sorry, looking for the bathroom. I don't know what was going on there, but I lived through it, so I didn't end up swimming with the fishes.
We actually at KSAN we didn't really grasp onto it properly. We thought it was so much fun to have all of these record promotion people coming from all different cities and bringing us copies of brand new records. And when you think about what kind of records were coming out every week in the late 60s or early 70s, it was just so remarkable. We thought it was our job to like take them out to lunch and probably get them high. We were very slow on understanding anything about payola or anything like that. And each, the thing that I think carried through at KSAN, Donahue had a remarkable ability to find people and just know that they would make great music disc jockeys. He had a remarkable ability to pick people that most of us had no radio experience. There were a few of us. Bob McClay had a long top 40 radio career before he came. Norman Davis had done much radio, but for the most part, we were very young and most of us had not worked in radio before. And Donahue would just kind of pluck us out of the air and know that we would bring a particular personality to whatever we did, not so much personality in being an announcer, but a musical personality, things that we really loved. And we were taught to stand by what we played. There's an upside and a downside to not having a playlist. Mm-hmm. When you don't have a playlist, it's your choice. You're the one that chose the record that nobody liked when you played it. So it became very much, it was important to us to kind of study and to find things. Ben, I can think of people that, you had a remarkable ability to pick some really cool people that were not exactly what were mainstay KSAN artists, Right. I just think of Jackie DeShannon and the people that you used to love to play. And we each had our particular things and we all brought it to this mixing pot of music. And we listened to each other's shows. We were also fans of each other's radio programs. So, if Richard found something and started playing it, it would catch my ear. And that's how I would, delve deeper into it.
And
Right.
that was the thing that we all had in common, was we were all music freaks, music geeks. We all loved the music. Even if you sort of didn't like the person, socially, you could talk about the music, and you cared about the music. You cared passionately about the music. The other thing about today, Larry, you were talking about what's going on today. There's something about podcasting that carries on the tradition, the theater of the mind tradition that is radio. The distinction, of course, is there's very few music podcasts,
Yeah.
but it's still, people want that. People want theater of the mind. People want community. People want to get turned on to music. And as Ben pointed out, they'll find it somewhere.
Yeah. Well, from the listener version of it, stations that you're talking about, it was always an adventure. I mean, it wasn't you turned on because you wanted to hear music that reinforced what you already knew. You were listening to hear what was going to be put on there that you'd never heard before in your life. And so in that respect, I always thought of that freeform radio as kind of the leadership position, like taking me different places and educating me. And that was the thrill of that,
Well, it still is. On Moon Alice Radio that I program and DJ for, it is a jam band. Moon Alice is psychedelic soul, 10 members, and they're all over the place. And so am I. And we play the classic rock stuff, and we play the Dead, but I also bring in Adele and Silk Sonic
Sure.
and Amy Winehouse and Lady Gaga and Louis Armstrong, Kiss to Build a Dream On. It's just whatever comes to my mind that might work musically, in fitting whatever had just come before, I'm free to do. And fortunately, Bonnie, Ben, and others have that same freedom still.
Well, actually, you kind of answered the question that just popped up here on my screen, which is, besides Bonnie, who that we're listening to, who of the two Bens are still broadcasting or working? So you just answered where you are, which is Moon Alice. And we've had Moon Alice here at the community center several times performing as a live band. And what else are we up to? Ben Manilla, have you had any, you're more a production, I guess.
Yeah, I stopped for being in front of the microphone in the mid 80s and stayed a producer throughout. I'm pretty much retired. We are having an incredible movie night on the 25th, where we're going to ask people to see the New Wave documentary about WLIR, and we'll discuss it then. So that's one thing I'm doing. The other thing that I'm doing is, I have 25 years of doing this blues show with Aykroyd, and I've got two different universities interested in taking my archives, my interviews. I have over 2,000 interviews. Wow. And
Wow.
I'd be ashamed to lose that. I mean, basically anybody who put out a blues record in the last 20 some odd years,
Wow.
we have an interview with.
Yeah.
So
I was hoping to ask you about that. That's incredible. I'd love to hear more of those, or some kind of collection of those too.
Yeah, I mean, we have 8 interviews with John Lee Hooker and 5 with B.B. King, and so I really want to. I'm hoping that we can preserve that stuff somewhere.
Yeah.
And for me, I do my KPFA show and have since 1990 or maybe 89. But for the last 12 years, I've run the Bill Graham Foundation. And the connections to Bill and KSAN, the two companies, Bill's company, BGP, and KSAN, grew up together. The foundation gives grants mostly in music, theater, and arts education. And that connects to everything else that came before it. At least to my mind, it does. And Hardly Strictly Bluegrass, it doesn't get more eclectic than the programming for Hardly Strictly Bluegrass. I think you could say Hardly Strictly Bluegrass is the KSAN of the festival world.
Very interesting.
So that is always how it has been for me. And I have to say that a lot of it stemmed from my years at KSAN. You know, just the people that we got to know and all of the things that we got to do prepared us really well to step off and do whatever else we were going to do in the world of music. And then I shut my eyes and I opened them, and it was 50 years later.
I'd like to work a plug for the documentary that's been produced about my life and career. What is it called? Like a Rolling Stone. And closing in on its distribution deal. Most likely in May, it will be on screens of one kind or another. And it's
So
just
great, Ben.
now that it begins, the whole documentary begins with me on KSAN. Even though it's supposed to be about my career at Rolling Stone, the producer decided it would begin with a KSAN jingle, followed by some nonsense I spouted, and then into the documentary. So there you are. KSAN gets top priority.
You know, there's another great documentary that I just came across about WBCN that
Oh, yeah, that's-
PBS
yeah.
did, and that's I mean, if folks are interested in this era, they really did a great job of setting the stage of what was coming, what came before, and how the this freeform radio changed things. It's called WBCN and the American Revolution, and they were very politically involved.
Incredible. Well, boy, this is kind of going at warp speed here. I would like to do this for a whole long time, but I can't. But I do want to say that we are going to be doing a little something about a documentary here at the community center as well, and I'll tell you about that in a second. First, I do have to say thank you to everyone: Ben Fong-Torres, Bonnie Simmons, and Ben Manilla. Thank you all for being here and doing this. It's just been incredible. And like I said, I've got a whole slew of questions about the Bay Area radio and all this stuff that I will hold for some other day. But again, I do appreciate your being here today. It's been really a very cool afternoon.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyway, we're going to be doing a documentary discussion, part of our artist film series discussion night. And that's coming up, here it is now, Monday, April 25th. And it's going to be about this film, New Wave, Dare to Be Different. And actually, I think Deborah is going to be telling you a little bit more about that. So I'm going to pass that over to Deborah.
Thanks, Larry. This month's artist film series will showcase New Wave, Dare to Be Different, a fast-moving documentary about the legendary WLIR, the radio station that galvanized the careers of U2, The Police, Duran Duran, and dozens of other artists. Leading the discussion will be our very own Ben Manilla. His guest will be Ellen Goldfarb, who directed the film, along with celebrated WLIR DJ Donna. And we encourage plenty of audience participation.
Thank you. Well, I think that we have a trailer for this film set up that we're going to take a look at in just a moment. I again do encourage all of you to get a chance to take a look at the film and then come and join us for the discussion. It's going to be pretty incredible.
We were very fortunate to be in New York at a time when a lot of people had, I think, sort of the same idea. Bands like the Ramones and Television and Patti Smith and Blondie, but there weren't very many radio stations that would play the music. One exception to that was WLIR.
You'd find stations in America that would play nothing but Stairway to Heaven all day.
These 100,000-watt radio stations, we're taking away all the advertising dollars from little LIR.
We had to do something. No question. I mean, we were screwed.
Broadcasting from the heart of Long Island, starting now. This is the new 92.7 LIR.
If you were to ask me which bands LIR broke in this country, that is a very long list.
LIR was really my first contact with the American record scene. Everyone was in there making this radio, and it was incredible. You felt so at home when you walked in.
Dennis McNamara at LIR had a real vision.
I loved it, I lived it, I dressed it, I slept it.
It wasn't just a radio station you put on, say, okay, I'm gonna hear. People just lived it.
Let's dare to be different. Let's go against the grain.
Every generation of kids wants their own music. It doesn't mean they hate their parents, but they enjoy getting music to piss off their parents.
Oh my goodness.
To
Okay.
watch, to
I
watch,
just want to say, pardon me, go ahead, Deborah.
to watch Dare to Be Different, stream it on Showtime and Showtime On Demand, or rent it on Amazon Prime, Fandango, Vudu, Vimeo, Overdrive.com. And then please join us April 25th on Zoom for a lively film discussion. Event details are available at sgvcc.org. See you there.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. And again, one more time, thank you, Ben Fong-Torres, Bonnie Simmons, Ben Manilla. Thank you so much for giving us this moment with you and this incredible bit of history. Also, I have to thank Deborah, my co-host here, Deborah Emerson, who's kind of a catalyst for this whole thing, kind of emerging in the first place and introducing us to Ben Manilla here in our own very own valley. Also got to thank the staffers here, which is Danielle Fogel, Alexa Davison, and the director Dave Court for helping us out here on all of this, and radio station KWMR for their support. Anyway, and check our website for the San Geronimo Valley Community Center, sgvcc.org. And you can find out more about this evening and a bunch of other things that we're up to as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.